Hi. Yeah, it works. Nice. Thanks. Cool. So I think I'm gonna start ahead of time, just to have like 5 more minutes. So first of all, thanks everyone for being here today, and the awesome Web3 Summit crowd for organizing this and making it happen. So I'm gonna talk about DAOs and the Web3 vision. So the first question is, who is familiar with DAOs? Okay, nice. Most of the audience. So you guys are very advanced already. So I will just start by saying, for people that are not familiar with DAOs, these DAOs are decentralized autonomous organizations. That's what they stand for. And basically what this means is that you have organizations that live on a blockchain and are autonomous. They don't require any other intermediary to work. And finally, well, they are organizations. And organizations can mean a lot of different things. And we will, later we will go on deeper and seeing which kind of form these organizations can take, because sometimes it's not like trivial organizations such as the one we think of today in the traditional world in the form of like companies and non-profits and all of that. So I will start talking a little bit about some points that I think are important for DAOs. So one of them is they operate without limited liability, or without individual liability, better said, which means that, you know, if you have a contract, the first thing you teach in contract law, or you learn in contract law, is that each contract has a counterparty. And DAOs completely break that, because you don't have like a counterparty anymore. You have like 0x123 being your counterparty. If there is even one, because the smart contract can be programmed in the DAO in a way that you don't have a simple one-to-one relationship, but a one-to-many, or a one-to, you know, just an organization that is composed of 20K token holders. So this kind of breaks all of that, which causes to break the traditional legal system completely. So you can think of DAOs not only as DAOs on blockchains, but for example, as the blockchains themselves. So you can think about Bitcoin as one of the first DAOs. It's decentralized, it's autonomous, because it sets incentives in a way that miners and other stakeholders basically make the network alive. And it's an organization because it's composed of a lot of people that are miners, full nodes, just users, you know, different stakeholders. You know, you have Bitcoin, you have Ethereum as examples of DAOs in which you pay transaction fees. And the question here is, if you are sending money to these networks for paying transaction fees, who are you sending money to? Who makes an invoice, right, in the traditional world? And that doesn't exist. Like, there is no miner that can make you an invoice, because when you pay that fee, you don't even know like which miner, or like who is on the other end of that agreement, right? So DAOs completely break how the legal system works. And also the cool thing about DAOs, and I will go into this further, but I think it's something not a lot of people have realized yet, but DAOs can be operated by machines too. So you can have an agent, you can set your agent, which like that stuff like voting for you. And basically you can have these agents that do a lot of stuff for you, and instead of having to literally go and perform every single transaction yourself. So that's very cool. And well, generally DAOs just destroy the nation-state monopoly on governance. Because before, if you wanted to organize, you needed to go through the nation-state. You needed to go to the company registry. You needed to go to, you know, this kind of processing, which they allow you to become like a sole proprietor, or allow you to become, you know, to create a company, or they allow you to do whatever. And here, they don't have to allow you anything. You can just go and create it, and that's it. And I will go a little bit into what Aragon is. So who knows about Aragon? Okay, cool, most of you. So I won't go very in depth, but basically it's a project on power freedom by creating tools of decentralized governance. There are a couple of teams working on the project right now, because of course we want to be decentralized ourselves and have multiple teams working on the platform. So one of them is Aragon 1, which is a project, or the team, sorry, that I'm representing, and the DAC, which is also Griff from the DAC is around here, so you probably see him around the conference. And so I will go a little bit into how DAOs work, or how they look like. So DAOs can take a lot of forms, but I will just talk about this particular form, which is the form it takes in an Aragon DAO. So an Aragon DAO has some apps in the left, and the apps may be thought of as the basic modules of the DAO. So in a company, you will have, for example, a cap table. You will have, like a bank account, and then you will have like some bylaws. And these bylaws determine how you can spend money or how the board can make decisions and a lot of that stuff. And that's very similar to what we actually built in the first versions of Aragon. Something very simple in which you can, give shares to people, and you can administer like a, like an Ethereum account with funds. And then you can finally change how these things work by changing the bylaws. What we figured out is that it doesn't work in the long term because DAOs are not like traditional organizations. They're breaking the mold of how organizations are created and maintained. So we thought let's just create like a bunch of different apps, or better than that, let's create a platform so anyone can create apps. So you can have like a voting app in this case. In a traditional organization, you would have like some bylaws that says that the board should make decisions. Here, what you have is a voting app. And then you can have some settings, some permissions here, which, for example, say that the voting app can withdraw funds from finance. That would be the equivalent of like bylaws in a traditional company or organization. And then the cool thing is, as all of that is code, you can swap it out very easily. So you can basically say, I don't like this voting app. I want to have a different voting app that is like Foodarchy-based or whatever. Or you can even say, I want to be a dictator because I feel like a dictator today. I want to swap out my voting app and just put like a only owner kind of thing. So you can do these things, and they're very flexible. And as you can see here, DAOs can be beautiful. DAOs can be sexy, and that's great. So just, if you look at this beautiful screen, you're like, oh, nice, it's actually like usable. But then if you think about the whole stack, it takes a lot of work to make this usable. So basically you have from what runs on the EVM, like all of these different apps, and these apps are connected by something that we call the access control list. And if you're familiar with operating systems, you will know that the same way that a computer administers how apps can access your hardware, or your microphone or your webcam or stuff like that, here it's very similar. You have this access control list, and this access control list regulates how the apps can access the DAO resources. So if a voting app has permission to withdraw funds from the finance app, for example, that means that if there's a voting, the voting passes, then you can withdraw funds from the DAO. And you can get really crazy with these permissions because you can have, like, for example, 5 different permissions that are if a voting passes and there is, some smart contract that triggers some call in Ethereum, and you have like a multi-sig that approves it, and you have another vote or something like that a month, like after the first vote happened, then this other thing happens and you have funds that are withdrawn, for example. So you can really get very complex, or you can get very simple because it's just like a permission system, really easy. And you can plug these different apps to create these very complex permission systems. And what we believe is, this enables for a lot of flexibility and creating your own DAO, like you create Lego bricks and you put together Lego bricks, basically. Then we have all the UI stuff. But before the UI stuff, we have like basically all the reducers. So this is a lot of state, a lot of contracts here. But in our current architecture, we try to minimize the amount of of code that is written into the contracts for security and also gas optimization. So it is not easy for the front end to consume all of this state, because this is a lot of events happening. For example, when a vote is cast, you have the event that the vote is cast. But then you have to, for example, like tally all the votes to know what is the current state of the voting. So that's a lot of work that it's hard for the UI to just consume that data. So we have some libraries here that take care of that for you. So when you create an Aragon app, you create also like a background script, and you tell the background script how to crunch your state, and then your state can be easily consumed. So when the user clicks the app here, for example, in voting, all the data is already loaded. You just have to load the front end and display the beautiful data. Of course, you will be wondering what happens if you are checking out a DAO that was created 10 years ago. Does your browser, because all of this is purely decentralized. There is not a single server here that is doing anything. So you will be thinking, you created a DAO 10 years ago. Does all of this part here have to scrap the blockchain for 10 years of events to actually, create the UI? And the answer right now is, yeah, we have to do that. And there may be 2 solutions for that. And this is part of the Web3 stack that has been built. And one of them is obviously projects like the app node that enable you to run your own nodes very easily, just as you have your router in your home. And so you don't have to connect to Infura or any other centralized server. And you can just connect to your node in your home network, which is very fast. And that's it. And then it's very easy. Or there is other like layer 2 solutions like the graph, in which you may be able to basically offload this to a network that will reduce all the data for you and just present you with the actual data the UI needs to render all of this beautiful stuff here. And then finally, we have the client UI and the app UI. And we have built a UI framework. Like if you see here, all the UI looks exactly the same. It is very cohesive. But all the part that is not the navbar, it's an iframe actually, and these apps are loaded directly from IPFS, and I will go into it in a second. But basically, like these are two different apps. Like the navbar is an app that we call the client, and that client grabs all the other different apps, permissions, voting, all of that stuff. It is not mandatory to use the same UI framework, but if you do, it looks exactly the same. Like users don't even know they are interacting with multiple apps, which is great for the whole like Web3 experience, because we don't have to confuse users with a lot of different UX behavior. Like interacting with Web3 and with decentralized technologies, it is very confusing. And if we tell a user to have like different like UI or UX paradigms, then it's going to be even more confusing. So we have to really take care of that. So something that I wanted to talk about is in this stack we have built here, there is something that we don't describe in this slide, which is how does package management work here. Like basically you have front-end apps and you have what we call like backend or like smart contracts basically. So you have to upgrade both, right? You have to upgrade the front-end, and a lot of people do that today by just having like a .com domain or like .org or like like kind of a Web 2.0 infrastructure. You just have a web page somewhere that does something. And smart contracts, well, not a lot of people have implemented upgradability so far in smart contracts. So how we thought about it is, well, both the smart contracts and the front end need to be updated. The smart contracts because you gotta do security fixes, but also you gotta just add features to your product. And also the front end needs to be updated, but it cannot be hosted in a centralized server, because otherwise, how is this different to like the Web 2.0? It is not any different if the front end is centrally upgradable. And you can do a lot of harm by upgrading front end apps. You can confuse the user. So when the user tries to like sign a transaction, it's actually signing a completely different thing. Instead of like voting yes, you vote no because the front end is confusing you. So front end is very, very important. So what we built is Aragon PM, which stands for Aragon Package Manager. And the Aragon Package Manager, it's a DAO itself. So when you deploy a package manager, it's a DAO. It's a decentralized autonomous organization that is just focused on package management. And so it enables two things. It enables the creation of registries. And you can think of registries as basically package registries. And a registry can contain multiple packages. If you have used something like, like a Linux distribution, or you have used an operating system like Mac or Windows, these platforms have their app stores. So you can think of registries as these app stores. You can deploy them. They are decentralized. They are sovereign. And then you have different packages. And the packages, you can think of them like apps. And you can upgrade them over time. And the cool thing is, you can really get crazy with how the governance and how all of this works. But I will just quickly go over how a process for using Aragon PM could go. So basically, you have used, all the way there, you have the maintainer. So the maintainer can be an individual who wants to upgrade a package. So for example, I'll take the example of ourselves, how we update this app. So a maintainer, for example, can be Jorge, which is our CTO, and he can upload some data. And this data can be the new frontend for the Aragon app, for example. And then this data, it is not directly uploaded to the blockchain, of course, because we don't want to upload it. But basically, you upload the hash to the package, and the package there is a smart contract. It's a part of the DAO that we just deployed as an Aragon PM DAO. And then that data you upload it to like IPFS or Swarm or whatever, and you just include the reference into the package. And then there can be some like approval process for which this package is actually included in the repo or in the registry, and that's obviously because of security, right? You gotta have maybe your community do like a quick voting to see if the package is malicious or not. You can have a committee of people that decide what to do. You can have a council, like a technical council. You can have different mechanisms. And then you have the user who downloads the new version from the package repo from the package. And this package belongs to the registry, and the registry is obviously hosted on Ethereum. And it is a very, very thin contract. You just have like a kind of a key value store of like, version 2 is this smart contract and this like data blob. Because the flow I'm describing here is for data blobs. So basically for any data blob that can be like an app, or it can be like an Android app, or even like an iOS app, stuff like that. But there's also smart contract availability that I will just talk in a second. So what we also have here is a very necessary part of the Web3 stack, which is all the access control list. So for example, if you implement this app, this counter, if you remove all the Aragon stuff here, it will be just like probably removing the auth modifiers and the is Aragon app inheritance, and you would just have a counter, like a plain counter. But then if you want to make this counter able to be upgradable, then you just add is Aragon app, and then it's automatically upgradable. So the smart contract can be upgraded anytime by any governance mechanism that you put in the package manager. So a governance mechanism can be that like 10% of your token holders have to vote to vouch for a new version, or it can be just that like there's a technical committee that approves the update, or like community can have like a veto power or something like that. You can really get very flexible here. And then the auth modifiers, what these modifiers do is say only entities with this permission here, which is called decrement role, can decrement the counter. How this looks is, if we go back to the permissions, for example, you could assign that voting can do that particular thing, that can decrement the counter. And so what that would mean is that if you want to decrement the counter, some people will have to vote, and the voting will have to pass in order to decrement the counter. And you can also say the same thing with Aragon PM. You can say you have to go through voting in order to upgrade the package. So that's kind of authentication and access control list in the Web3 stack. And this is how it works. If you want to just run like an Aragon app, it automatically publishes the APM package, the Aragon PM packages, builds a front end, push it to IPFS, and then you have a beautiful DAO. And you can just open the DAO and check the app. It's really that simple. I think it's the easiest way to create a decentralized application today, a fully decentralized one, because as I said before, we don't rely on any centralized servers, neither for frontend, neither for backend, or caching or anything like that. So what this takes us to is a few different use cases that I will go check in depth. So one of them is, once we have these very modular, flexible DAOs, we can do something that I think is very exciting, which is smart accounts. I used to call them personal DAOs, but I realized it's a bad name because DAO stands for organization, and if it's just like for your personal use case, it is probably not an organization or like a one-person organization. So I like the term smart account that someone, Jeremy from the DAC, posted in our forum. So these personal DAOs have multiple features. One of them is it represents you as your person. It's like your smart agent into the Web3 era, and supports ENS. So you can have like a cool name like mypersonaldao.aragonid.eth or whatever. You can have multiple apps. You can have a Vault app, a finance app, a voting app, even if you want to have your wife voting on stuff, for example. You can have very rich permissions between apps. You can say, for example, I want to enable someone like a friend to be able to withdraw some money from my finance app, but up to this, particular amount per week, for example. And you can do a lot of stuff which is like multi-sig kind of behavior, two-factor out. But the cool thing it is not hard-coded. Like I'm seeing a lot of solutions these days that are just thinking about two-factor out as like, you do a transaction from your computer and then you verify it with your phone and that's it, right? And it's hard-coded into the smart contracts and that's everything you can do. And I believe that's great, but you don't get this amount of flexibility or this amount of, user customization that you get with these DAOs. So, for example, you can have a key split app, and this split app gives permission. It's basically like a dead man switch. So if something happens to you, your friends can basically recover your funds. So how this will work is you have this app, and it gives permission to a set of people to access funds if you haven't, for example, transacted for a month, and the people can just send valid signatures to the app. And then if they send valid signatures to the app, someone can collect them and send them at once, for example, to the contract. And then the funds are sent to another like address or something like that. So you can have very easily key recovery that is customizable, upgradable by you because it's your personal DAO, and very easy to use if you implement a UI like the one I showed you before. You can have also a more complex approach, which is basically you can have multiple keys that can access more and more funds over time. So for example, you just have MetaMask that is your like hot wallet, and you can access just a little bit of ETH. If you have MetaMask plus Party Designer, you can access more. And if you have like all of those three, you can access everything. It's kind of a very rich modular multisig. And the cool thing is it does work for fans because you can plug it to the finance app that I just showed you in the sidebar before. But you can also plug it to any other app. For example, Pipeth. So you can have Pipeth like an company-owned Pipeth account, and you can have a DAO who is authorized to tweet or to peep or however that's a term. They can peep on the behalf of the organization. So you can have actually like fully decentralized organizations that have like social media, which is very exciting for a lot of reasons. And then something that I really, really love that you can do with decentralized organizations that are this modular is you can do decentralized version control systems, like truly decentralized. So we have seen with Git and GitHub that, you know, like just Microsoft just bought GitHub. There are a lot of doubts on what will happen with them. And obviously, like overall, I feel that, you know, the community here, we would like for more alternatives to exist, or in general, truly decentralized alternatives to exist. And so Git is decentralized by itself, but then you have GitHub, which has a lot of like cool stuff on top, and that is fully centralized. So there is a team called Pando, which has leveraged all of these access control list and upgradability to basically build decentralized version control system on Ethereum and IPFS. And so how this works is that you can have super granular permissions. It is not you can, you know, with GitHub, for example, or Git, you can have people who can push, who can merge, stuff like that, but you cannot get really granular. With this, you can actually, well, first of all, it's hosted on-chain. So you can have, for example, a DAO or like token holders having to approve a pull request, which is amazing. So for example, you can think of the whole pipeline, right? From where developers push their code to developers create builds, and then user downloads the build to run that on their computer or mobile phone. And along that way, there are a lot of black holes and a lot of things where, you know, things that can go wrong. Starting from, you have code that can get merged without much like authorization from the community. Then you can have builds that are produced also maliciously, so basically to attack the users. And then when the users run the build, they can be running one that is you know, compromised, and then therefore, no matter how decentralized we think we are doomed. So with Pando, we can at least cover the first part, which is when a user or when a developer pushes code, you can actually make sure you can put out a step there in which the community or some small part of the community has to review a pull request, for example. And the cool thing is not only how you can review and fix that part of the problem, but also that you can reward those people. I think like a year or 2 years from now, every single crypto protocol out there will have a pool for developer rewards because it doesn't make any sense otherwise. You have problems like the ones we've been having in Ethereum. And I think Fred Ersam wrote a very interesting post about this some time ago. But the fact is, blockchain development is having some like tragedy of the commons scenario, which is very ironic because the blockchain was supposed to solve the tragedy of the commons. But now we have, you know, we basically cannot keep up with the development of our core protocols because there is no such incentive. The incentive is to build upon them. And so I think every single crypto protocol or even blockchain should have this pool that is community governed and that rewards contributors. And Pando is an amazing way to do that on-chain. There is no central point of failure. If you use GitHub, then you're relying on some people that are clicking merge pull request or not. With this, you're not relying on that at all. The cool thing is it's ready. Like I think they are ready for mainnet like super soon. But we need a UI. Obviously, like this is cool for developers, but you know, GitHub user interface is amazing, and we should try to replicate that. And the earliest we can replicate that, the earliest we are going to get truly decentralized. So that's Pando. Something we are also working on in regards to DAOs is DAOs are really cool, and they enable new kinds of interactions that were not possible before, such as the one we were describing before. In you know, like you can have a smart account, and these smart accounts can do a lot of stuff for you. But there is a problem with, I would say, smart contracts in general, but DAOs just take it to a new level, which is when you have pseudonymous entities, because at the end, like DAOs are just pseudonymous entities. It is very hard for you to trust the people you are or the organizations you are interacting with. So when you interact with another entity in the blockchain system, you don't really trust them, and that's the whole point. It's a trustless system. But on the other hand, you can be doing stuff that is not covered on the smart contract, and therefore you have to trust the other party. Example, you can rely on a blockchain for payroll, such as, you know, we are building a payroll app in Aragon that enables people to get paid by the block. So each block, they could go and say, I want my salary for that block, which is very cool. And that can be fully automated in a blockchain. But then if you have stuff like, I want to pay someone to design my logo, it's very hard because the blockchain doesn't know about design, the blockchain doesn't know about how cool your logo is, and the blockchain doesn't know about your taste for design at all. So that's very hard to put on a blockchain. I would say almost impossible. So how we see it is, let's not try to put everything as smart contracts. Let's try to just have very effective dispute resolution, so the stuff that is not covered by smart contracts can actually be leveraged on chain. So you can be like, okay, I'm going to set up this smart contract for paying out this contractor that will, you know, create a logo for me. But I will also set up a parallel contract, much more similar to the contracts in the traditional world, I would say. English written, very subjective. But then what we can do is we can have these two smart contracts, and one of them is amazing because it's automated, and I don't need to do anything at all. It's just there. It pays my contractor, and that's it. And another one, which can do two things. First of all, it can protect both parties if the smart contract fails, because we know that smart contracts are not perfect, and they do not sometimes represent the intent of their creators. And the second part is I can also write out some more like, you know, humane stuff. So I can write out, you know, I will pay the contractor if I like the logo. If I don't like the logo, nah. So what you can have there is very granular clauses like you have in the legal system today. And we're building a decentralized court so that these clauses in these cases can be settled very quick. Because the system that we have today is great except for, well, basically two reasons. One of them is it is very slow and it is very expensive, which I think probably expensive. It is, you know, it is expensive because it is slow in the first place. And the second one is because it is expensive, people have unequal access to fairness. Because a legal system provides you fairness, and if you don't have money to, you know, fight for the fairness, then you don't have fairness in your life. And what we want to create is basically a race to the bottom in how this legal system works. And so you have a decentralized network, which could be the Aragon network, which has a basic constitution, and then you can nest a lot of courts. You can have like a Supreme Court, which just fights for human rights, for example, and you can have another sub-court, which is just focused on, you know, like freelancer markets, for example. And you can have another one, which is freelancer markets for logos. And you can use these courts, and you can have judges that are economically incentivized to analyze the cases case by case and resolve them very quickly. And this can be like pseudonymous entities who have reputation at stake. You don't need to be a lawyer. You don't need to get past a bar exam. You know, you can just go and basically analyze cases and vote for them. And if there is any bribery or any problem, you can always, like the users can always appeal up to the Supreme Court. So that's how we see the system. That's still in research phase, but you can go to the white paper there, and we also have a bunch of stuff in our research forum about like bribery and all these problems that are very hard to tackle. Then another thing that I think it's super interesting is when you think about voting and blockchain governance, people usually think like, participation, like no one is going to participate in these systems. And there are two answers to that. One of them is incentivizing them to participate with, for example, footarchy. And I will go a little bit into footarchy. Footarchy basically means that you can reward those that were right about some outcome or slash those that were not right. So basically you can say, if the GDP of the country is growing 10 years from now, I will reward those that voted for the president that is running the country those 10 years, or the other way around, right? So that's one answer. The other answer is, when you think about voting, you think about going somewhere and putting like a piece of paper in a ballot. And I think we're just thinking wrong about it. Like voting shouldn't be that way. We have amazing technology today in which you can basically have these smart accounts, these DAOs. You can vote on-chain with a transaction that costs like 5 cents. It's very cheap. And then you can leverage all the machine learning and all the like text recognition that we have today to actually like automate voting. So I don't think like 10 years from now or 5 years from now, we're going to be like, putting like a piece of paper in a ballot. I think we just have like a push notification saying, hey, I think this proposal aligns with your value freedom. Do you want to vote it or no? Vote? No. Whatever. And you can set these kind of super basic values of you. You can say, I care about freedom, and I would sacrifice security over freedom, for example. And then the machine will analyze for you what are your values and what are the proposals in the DAO and how they correspond to your values, and then vote for you. I don't think we're there yet, but what we can do in the meantime is have this semi-automated voting in which it can really simplify the way we vote by kind of auto-completing our thoughts in some sense. So I think that's very powerful, and I think that will resolve a lot of the participation problems we have. Just making it easy, like a push notification, yes or no, and then providing some context and some like, doing some of the research work that we have to do today to be informed voters for us. And I think that's super important, that will raise participation a lot. So I think we should forget about just humans voting, and we should think about, we have these amazing slaves, which are machines, and I hope they are not listening to this like 100 years from now, because they'll be like, these fucking humans. But we have these machines that are slaves and work for us, and we should use them. So automated voting. What else is there to say? Am I running out of time? No, I'm good. But I want to allow also for some Q&A. So I will just finish off with a couple things. So this very complex system that I was just describing, it will be in the mainnet soon, and soon means days, finally. I don't want to give any dates, but it's just like days away. And the White Hat group, which were the guys that hacked the DAO, so they know what they're talking about, did an audit and were impressed. So we are just finalizing our 3rd audit or so, and it's ready to go. So you will be able to use that at app.argon.org. And the idea is that with these systems, we can experiment with governance at the speed of software. And I believe this is one of the most, or probably not the most important part of the whole Web3 stack, which is the culmination of all of these layers up to how we organize as humans and improving how we organize as humans in the next decade. So that's it. Hope you enjoyed it, and now we can have some Q&A. Thanks. Oh, and by the way, if you would like to talk about governance more, there is a discussion that is going to happen at 5:30 at the Hackers Space upstairs. Yeah, cool. Thanks. How do questions work? Should I just hand the mic? Okay.
So coming back to the court system, how do you actually enforce those decisions? Like if I am a freelancer who's done some work, what's my incentive to allow the person to actually appeal my payment?
That's a very good question that I didn't actually describe. So the idea is, in the blockchain system, you cannot go to like someone's door and kick it out and like point a gun to their head, which I think is great, and that's where we are building all of this. But what you can do is you can play with cryptoeconomic incentives. And so our idea is that when you create an agreement with other party, you can set up some minimum and maximum collateral, which basically means how much do you value this agreement. And so you can say, for example, I want to go into this freelancing agreement only if the other party, if the freelancer is able to provide like, 1,000 tokens up to collateral. And then I know that by entering into this agreement, if the freelancer doesn't work out, I can reclaim him these 1,000 tokens to the court. So you can play with this collateral to basically make sure, like, it's kind of a limited liability system. And you can use this collateral as insurance for exactly what you said. Like, what happens if something goes wrong? What do I get in exchange for something going wrong and appealing the court?
So speaking of incentives, you mentioned this freelancer agreement, the payroll app. So would there be any incentive for actually using this payroll app versus doing it in a traditional like status quo, like normal way?
Yeah, I would say cost. Like whatever we can use smart contracts before this kind of other contracts, Aragon network contracts or whatever we can call them, is cost. Like smart contracts are very easy and they don't take any maintenance cost basically. If you want to use this system, it's great for a lot of subjective and humane tasks, but it will be more costly for stuff that can be used wrote in a smart contract.
And following question, so let's say if I'm employing 10 contractors and then maybe 100 of smaller one-time fixed project kind of jobs, like design a logo, would I need to fund my budgets into smart contract, or how basically would it work from a traditional like cash flow perspective? Would it be any advantages or disadvantages for using the system?
You mean for using some court system like
payroll? Would there be? Would I need to pre-fund it or?
With payroll, for example, with payroll app.
Yes.
You don't need to. You just have to fund the. So when the smart contract executes the code and gets money from the finance app, you just have to make sure the finance app has money for whatever the payroll needs to happen. Yeah.
Hey, excuse me. Awesome talk. Thank you. We're thinking about kind of trying to allow for something like a state channel or a plasma cache operator to be owned by a DAO, an Aragon DAO. Is that out of question in terms of aligning the incentives across multiple people as opposed to one individual? Like, does that make sense?
Well, is the question if it makes sense or if it is technically doable today?
Yeah, that's more like, would it be possible, in your mind, to align the incentives across multiple people in the way that we're kind of looking to do in one centralized operator now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be possible. When I last checked Plasma, which was some months ago, I didn't see all the basically EVM features that we would need to run our system on a Plasma chain. But I think that would be great. And also, I think with DAOs, what you can have is you can have different levels of trust. So you can have a DAO with your friends that is a Plasma chain, and then settle that sometime in the future into the main chain to have all the security that the main chain gives you. But you can totally run that off chain in a Plasma chain or something like that. If you are just trying to you're relaying low stakes situation and with some friends or some trusted people or semi-trusted people.
You mentioned cost as one of the pros of that system, but I'm very skeptic about that because collateral is pretty much the highest cost that you could put on a project. In terms of cash flow, it freezes, it reduces your liquidity, and also if we move into a world with more proof of stake, then not being able to stake something somewhere else is a huge cost you could imply. So what do you say to that point of critique?
Yeah, opportunity cost is huge if we move into a world of proof of stake. The answer there for us is that this stake, and I think it's very similar to other proof of stake systems, this stake that you have collateralized, you can use it to interact with the system in such a way that if you participate in the governance or you participate in the network, you get basically more tokens. So you get rewarded. I think it's the same question for a lot of proof of stake systems. And what you have to do is, as a protocol designer, you just have to care about making your protocol more appealing to, like, you know, this cost opportunity. So I think that's just the answer there, which is let people stake their tokens and then use them for something inside the protocol.
So you're building a decentralized core system as well. Can you tell us how is this going?
Well, from a research point of view, it's going great. And also, I think this system is DAO native. Like, basically, we built it so DAOs can flourish and can exist in the world. We don't believe DAOs are going to be able to succeed in the world without this, like, layer 2 kind of implementation, a digital jurisdiction, if you will. So research, like all the research and all of that goes great. We have DAOs, which is great because without DAOs, it doesn't make any sense at all. And the Aragon network itself is going to be a DAO. So we have all the software components. It's a matter of, like, basically playing with crypto economics, launching, like, some experiments, and dealing with it. But it's still research, I would say. Yeah, thanks. Cool, thanks.